Alright guys and gals, I am just getting ready to build a new dozen arrows, and I thought I would share my process with you. Now, I don't claim to be a professional. I'm just going to share what works for me, and I hope that it will help you. So I used to go to a pro shop and have them cut and build the arrows. Most of them were already fletched from the factory, which is great. I know a lot of you are still doing that, and that's just fine. However, if you ever take ownership in building your own arrows, I think you will find another level of accuracy. I did, and I'll never go back. So I just wanted to share with you my process in hopes that maybe it will allow you to be a little more accurate, to spend a little time. You take more pride in your work and your end product in a nice set of arrows. I'm going to go through what all I use first, and then I'm going to slowly go through the steps on how to do everything. Again, I'm not a professional. There's many ways to do all of this, and there's many products to use, so please don't think that I'm pushing one product to the next. I'm just going to share with you everything that's worked great for me. I like to use Victory arrows. They make a fantastic product. I specifically like the VAP TKO line. They're a 0.166 inner diameter, so a micro diameter shaft. I also like to use their new insert, which is like a half in and half out. The shaft actually goes up inside the collar, which totally encapsulates the whole end of the shaft by about an inch. So it basically just keeps everything protected from any hard quartering shots or bone or rock or anything like that if you were to happen to pass through. That way you're hopefully not ruining arrows all the time. This specific one is an aluminum insert, and it's 50 grains, and they also make an aluminum stainless version that's 75 grains. So depending on your arrow weights and your front of center goals, that's kind of up to you on what you use. And they also have a 35 grain model, which is the standard shock insert. The standard shocks come with a dozen of the VAPs, but you can upgrade again to the 50 or the 75 grains, which are a little more beefy in my opinion. The next process is to go through a arrow spine check, and basically just kind of roll the arrow and mark where the spine of the arrow kind of comes together. The carbon wraps and bonds to one another through that process. I like to mark that spine, and I like to put my odd vein on that spine every time. That way each arrow is indexed the exact same when it comes out of the bow. So I'll go through a spine check, I'll mark where the spine is at, and then after that I'll move over to my arrow saw and I'll go ahead and cut the arrow to the length that I need. And I specifically, want to knock the arrow, draw it, and have somebody mark from the side roughly an inch or inch and a quarter past where the arrow contacts the arrow rest. The next process is after the cutting, is to use a squaring device, and I choose the G5 arrow squaring device. It has a little rough pad or stone type surface that you can butt the end of your arrow up against and turn it, and that allows the end of the shaft to be square, so that when you install the insert, everything is perfectly perpendicular to the arrow shaft. That way you get perfect alignment. I also square the back end so that when you slide in your nock, it's the same way. You don't have any uneven surfaces for that nock to contact. I specifically like to use a pin nock. The reason being is it adds a little bit of weight, and I know that you don't necessarily always want to add weight to the rear of your arrow, but I shoot a lighted nock, and so that adds more weight. And so I went to this setup because it seems to be close to the weight of my lighted nock. That way I'm not always having to shoot a lightweight nock like a 5 grain nock and then shoot like a 15 grain lighted nock, because you will see some differences in those 10 grains, especially at longer distances. Your arrows will hit lower if you put in one of those heavier nocks. Next, you want to have some sort of flame. or heat device, some sort of glue for your inserts, and I choose the Boning Cool Flex. It's kind of a hot melt that cools fairly quickly. You can cool it right after you glue in the insert by dipping it in cold water, or you can just be patient and let it set up. Make sure that you have some sort of towel to wipe off the excess glue. Then moving over to the fletching process, I like the Boning Fletch Tight Platinum. I've also used some sort of like Loctite super glue or a Gorilla brand super glue. All those work just fine. However, some of the super glues can be a little bit brittle at times, and if you don't get a good clean job on your shaft and your vane, those will kind of pop right off on you. So that's one thing that you got to be careful of. Next, I'll go to my vanes, and I prefer a 2-inch. I actually use a Vane Tech vane. These are made by Gold Tip. The reason being is because they're a little softer than, say, a Blazer vane. The Blazer vanes are thicker and they're more rigid, but I feel that they're louder going through the air. These seem to fly very quiet, but yet still steer very good for what I need. I use the Arizona Easy Fletch. This is the 2-inch mini fletch, and I know they just came out with a 3-inch version as well, and it basically puts a helical on to where if you're shooting a fixed blade broadhead, it allows for the best steering capabilities in a 2-inch vane or a 3-inch vane, depending on the size of the arms that you have. So these Easy Fletches are really handy because you can switch out the arms from a 2-inch to a 3-inch to a 4-inch if you just want to get one jig and then buy the replacement arms, or you can just get a jig for all. It's up to you. I prefer these just because it's quick, it's easy. You can fold this thing up, sit it in a jar of acetone and get it cleaned up if you get some buildup over time. I know there's many fletching options out there. That's fantastic. Use what you like. I have a small brush that's like a kind of a straw brush or something for cups. I like to dip this in some sort of alcohol or acetone and take the end of the arrow shaft when I'm done cutting everything and squaring everything. I'll get that wet in some sort of cleaning agent, and I'll go in and I'll clean the inside, especially on the end that you're going to be adding the insert, just to get all that film and dust out of there. It needs to have a really good bond with that Cool Flex that I was talking about. Next, I always have some sort of cotton swab or like a round cotton pad, just so you can wipe the arrow shaft down, especially right before putting the fletching on. You never want to put a fletching on a shaft that has a little bit of residue from your fingers, oils, or grease, or dirt. I like to use a 91% alcohol just because it really does a good job of eliminating all the grime and oil and dust and whatnot. And then always have a jar to pour some of that into so you can kind of dip in or use your brush and dip in. I found that to work the best. And always make sure you have a good set of safety glasses when you are heading in for arrow cutting. So that is the product accessories, or that's the product tools that I use in order to build all of my arrows. Now I will go into the process of getting my spine alignment taken care of, and then we'll move into cutting the arrows, adding squaring the ends, and adding the sliding in the inserts, and adding the fletching, and then that should be it. So I will move over into the arrow squaring. All right, guys. The first step again is to put an arrow on the spine alignment tool and basically find where that spine comes together, or the carbon wrap comes together. I'm going to do that for you right now, and I'll try to focus in on the dial here and just give you an idea of how that process works. One thing I will tell you with Victory, they do a spine alignment arrow on their shafts, and so they basically do the work for you. However, I found where those marks might be slightly off here and there. For the most part, they're accurate, but I always like to double check everything, and this is just a good exercise for me to show you in case you go with a different manufacturer and you want to do this on your own. All right, the first thing you want to do is you'll see two sets of rollers, and you want to pull up your dial indicator and just sit it right on the middle of the arrow shaft. And then most of these tools come with a weight, and you'll hang that weight right on the middle of the arrow, and that will flex the arrow, which will basically magnify any imperfections on your gauge. So then I always take on the ends of the shaft, on the outsides of the rollers, and I'll slightly roll this, and you'll see that every little movement, you'll see the gauge going down, and basically I'm coming off of the high spine. And I call it the high spine when the spine comes together and it goes, you know, the spine comes together, and whenever that's at the top, this dial or this needle will indicate that. So wherever that is, I like to take a silver Sharpie and I'll mark that spot, and then after that I will use that mark in order to put my odd color vein lined up with that mark every single time. So I'm going to come around, and my needle is starting to rise, and I've done this arrow already just to kind of give you an idea, but right here I'm coming up on the high spine, which again I've marked already, and it just so happens that it's perfectly lined up with the victory mark, the arrow on the victory shaft here, and so their marking is accurate on this arrow. So I'm coming up on it, and again you'll see the highest number on your gauge will show up wherever that spine is at, or wherever the high spine is at. So after you get that set, there it is. I'm right about 23. So I'm going to mark that spot, and then I'll just show you, you're going to roll past it. We actually got to 24 on that one. Okay, we're going to roll past it, and you're going to see that needle start coming back down as you come off of that spine. So just do a couple practice rotations, and you can kind of see real quick when that arrow starts to build or the number starts to increase. You're coming up on that spine. It'll plateau. That's where you need to put your mark, and then you can roll off of it just to verify again. Okay, the next step is to cut the arrow shaft the length that is preferred for your bow setup or your draw length. I've already drawn the arrow back on my new bow, and I've made a mark about an inch past where it's contacting the arrow rest. I've already set this in my saw, and I've moved this indicator or this starting point holder in the exact location. I clamped it down, and now the blade will contact exactly where I need to for the cut. So I'll go ahead and place it in and get started here after I turn the saw on. Okay, and now I've got a good cut arrow, nice and square cut, and the next step will be to square the ends of the shaft. All right, I've grabbed my arrow squaring device. Again, this one's made by G5. It's got a little disc here that's like a coarse metal. It's got kind of a sandpaper feel to it. Basically, this has two grooves, one here and one here, and you just sit the arrow shaft in like so, and I'll just sit it down on the table and apply pressure, and then just slide it up against that disc and rotate it. And I'll do that on both ends again, that way both ends are perfectly square. And you want to apply pressure forward so that it's contacting that disc, and then you also want to apply pressure downward so that that arrow doesn't move around on you. So I've got finger pressure and I've got rotation pressure forward on the disc. Okay, now the end of the shaft is square, and that's where the insert will go in. Then I'm going to go ahead and flip the arrow around and do the backside where the nock is going in. Okay, now that I've got both ends of the shaft squared up, I like to take this brush and dip it in some cleaning agent. In this case, I'm using 91% alcohol. And I'll go ahead and insert this in the ends of both shafts. I'll basically just clean out any of the carbon residue. And I'll do that a couple times just to make sure it's good and flushed. One last thing that I'll do is I'll dip it in the actual bottle of alcohol. I'll take the lid off, dip it in, and then let it drip dry. And I'll do that on both ends. Sometimes I'll apply a little air and try to clean out the shaft a little bit. But you have to be careful with some of your compressed air because it will have a little bit of oil residue in that as well. All right, now that we've got the aero good and clean, I went ahead and installed the knock on the knock end. And the next step is to install the insert. One thing that I didn't mention earlier, but I would highly recommend, is taking your insert and make sure it's dipped in alcohol or some sort of cleaning agent so that the insert doesn't have any foreign objects or material on it, so that the glue can do its job and bond to the insert instead of dirt or oil or something like that. So I've already done that. Now the next step is to get my heat source out and have my my Cool Flex hot melt ready. And I'm gonna go ahead and apply heat to the insert for 15 seconds. And then I'll go ahead and just slide this along the heated up insert and apply a good even coat all the way around. And then I'll go ahead and push that in and twist, and make sure that that twisting, and while I'm engaging that all the way into the insert, that assures that the glue is evenly distributed throughout the whole shaft of the insert. Okay, now that is fully engaged, and I will go ahead and just let that sit and cool. All right, now it is time to put fletchings on the rear of the aero. And again, what I've done earlier is marked the high spine of the aero, and I've got a silver Sharpie marker mark right there. And I'm going to take the odd colored vein. Obviously you have two of the same and then one odd color, and I'm always going to put the odd color, which is white in this case, right in line with that mark. So you're always going to have your cock vein or your odd vein on the spine. So the first step that I do is I always have a jar of alcohol, and I want to make sure that the rear of the shaft is perfectly clean and free of debris. And I'll let that dry good, and I'll sit that there. And one thing that a lot of people miss, and I've learned the hard way, is they don't clean the veins. So I'll take the same Q-tip, dip it in alcohol, and I'll wipe those veins down really good. You would be surprised how much you handle those and you get oil and fingerprints on them. And we'll go ahead and let those dry. All right, the next step after you've cleaned your veins is to apply your glue. And again, I'm going to make sure that these are good and dry. I had a little bit of alcohol that wasn't quite set up. But anyway, let that air dry. Then I'll use my Boning Fletch Type Platinum, and I'll put just a little bit of glue on each vein, and you'll use the applicator to kind of spread that out. And again, you do not want to go too much here, because you don't want a bunch of excess squeezing out onto your aero shaft. Obviously you can clean everything up later, but just put a nice even coat, just kind of paint it on, and everything will fall down into the groove of that vein. Okay, once that's applied, you got a clean aero shaft. Don't touch where the veins are going to be. You'll engage the knock there's a groove in the bottom of the Easy Fletch. And again, you want to make sure that the spine is lined up with the white, in this case, vein, or the cock vein. I'm going to put that in. Okay, now I'm fully engaged. I'm going to make sure my veins are in the spots they should be all the way around. And then this is spring loaded. So basically you just release the spring and it slides up and closes those down. And then there's a collar that you'll slide over the end of the arrow shaft and onto these arms. And I'm going to do that right now. Okay, and then you'll just apply pressure. You want to push down pretty good, and then there's a hook on the bottom side of this, and you'll just hang it from a hook on the ceiling or on the wall or whatever, and you just let that hang there. Now the instructions on this glue say 5-minute clamp time, so you want to leave it in the clamp for 5 minutes, and then once that's done, you'll take it out and you'll let this cure for 48 hours before shooting this arrow. This is kind of a slow cure glue, obviously. Again, you can use some sort of super glue if you'd like. I've had decent luck with it. I know that if you get to where you're shooting through like a block target or something, that will definitely start peeling arrow or peeling fletchings off. So you got to just be careful with what you're shooting through and how much abuse you put your veins through. All right, well, I've let the arrow set in the clamp for about 10 minutes, and I got a really nice adhesion, and I took the arrow out, and again, my white vein is lined up with my spine, so that looks really good. I've got my pin nock installed. I went ahead and put a brand new field point on just to make sure that I get one that's not bent. Everything looks really good on this arrow, so that completes my arrow build, other than I'm going to put it on the spin tester to see how it spins. You can pick these spin testers up, you know, any archery supply shop. They're fairly inexpensive. A lot of guys can, you know, spin it on the table, or you know, some guys are just really good at blowing on the fletchings and get it to spin and just kind of check things out that way. But I like to get an actual spin tester. And as you can see, I have no wobble on the insert end. My field tip is spinning perfectly true. And then my fletching is all lined up, and the nock is not wobbling. And that is the conclusion of the arrow build. All right, guys and gals, I hope you found this video helpful. Like I said, I know that I really started noticing a big improvement in accuracy when I started taking the time and putting all the components together and really paying attention to detail on the perfect cuts and squaring the ends of the shafts and making sure my fletchings were installed just so. And again, it's really taken me to the next level with my archery. So hope you found value in the video, and I hope you can get out and start building some arrows of your own. Again, I highly recommend the Victory line. They're just an exceptional high tolerance shaft. They pay very close attention to detail. Again, they give you the spine alignment arrow on the shaft, and that will cut one step out of your process. And I also recommend upgrading to their higher quality inserts, just because, again, they'll encapsulate the end of that shaft a little bit better for some toughness. Other than that, I'll leave you guys alone, and I really appreciate you watching. Please share this video if you like it, and subscribe to my channel. I really appreciate everybody, and I wish you all the best of luck this season. Thank you.